magic. Thank you very much. Thank you. You're too kind. Thank you. I'm Ed McCann. I'm your host for today's Writers Read event. The theme is the supermarket. And that is a prompt that I thought would be kind of universal and fun, partly because my most significant after-school job was in a branch of a New York City chain supermarket. And that was decades ago. So my memories of that time are probably pretty romanticized. I am not thinking so much about the long hours on my feet. I'm not thinking about the fights or the shoplifting arrests or the collapse of an end cap of mayonnaise jars and the spectacular mess that made, but more about how my coworkers and I would amuse ourselves to pass the shift. We played a game called Bury the Bagger, which meant if you were ringing, you were trying to send stuff down the belt as fast as you could so that the person, you would put them in the weeds. This was a way to kind of pass the train. And of course, that was before scanners, so we were actually pressing buttons. You had to remember things. Anyway, I also remembered regular customers who wanted to talk and tell you their stories, and especially summer nights at closing time after we had cashed out the last cashiers and locked the doors, and we'd go meet our friends at the Carvel, which was also closed, or maybe head to the beach at 11 o'clock at night. But this was, I thought supermarket. I had so many associations that I thought would be fun and interesting. And so our editorial team of Steve Lewis, David Masello, Rhonda Zangwill, and Lisa Donati-Mayer reviewed a lot of submissions on this topic. And the memories and the stories that they called forth are far more profound and powerful than my own. Reading these pieces prompted some very deep emotional responses, as I think you will experience as well. And it made me actually consider what one of the central purposes of any art form is. What is the purpose of art except to make us think, make us feel? We have a lot of feels in this show, as you will soon discover. But I think if all art intends some sort of emotional response, it is that engagement that makes art both powerful and transformative, and I think that's especially true of the work I'm proud to present from all the fine writers who you were about to meet. And so let's get right to it. Native New Yorker Jack O'Connell lives these days on Long Island with his wife Margaret, and he knows how lucky he is to not only be an actor by profession and choice, but also a working actor with dozens of credits. You may recognize Jack from his roles in film and TV, among them Doubt, Big Night, Inside Llewyn Davis, Mad Men, Nurse Jackie, Vinyl, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. He recently had a guest starring role in the Netflix show Kaleidoscope, and he's making festival rounds in La Cura, which is a series dealing with Alzheimer's. In The Apprentice, the story Jack shares today, he recounts how on-the-job training and becoming one of the guys came at a price to his conscience. Please give a very warm welcome back to Jack O'Connell.
On the day after graduating high school in 1961, I started work as a butcher's apprentice for the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, also known as the A&P. Not ready to pursue a formal education, I chose a different path. I was assigned to a new store in Massapequa, Long Island, a sprawling suburb rising overnight out of farmland. Most new homeowners hailed from Brooklyn, Queens, or the Bronx, with a good chance that their parents were born in other countries. Local teens nicknamed it Matzo Pizza, reflecting the ethnic makeup. Jerry Seinfeld, a native, claimed Massapequa was an indigenous translation, meaning near the mall. Inside our huge 39-degree refrigerator, each butcher, there were 6 of us, had a block where they would prepare meats for sale, smoke cigarettes, and talk. My station was a corner block where I was assigned to chickens, quartering, splitting, and cutting the birds into parts. The men, mostly in their 50s, would discuss a variety of subjects. I would listen to tales about Korea and the Chosin Reservoir in 1950, back to the Battle of Anzio, World War II, 1944. Other more topical subjects range from Brigitte Bardot to Jackie Gleason's dramatic turn in the film The Hustler. The Mantle Maris home run race was a topic that summer, as well as JFK and the space race, with the chimpanzee leading the way. Our meat manager, Lenny, would stress selling the whole cow, from tongue to tail. Our savvy customers would order pork shoulder for gabagool, veal shanks for osso buco, or tails for oxtail soup. Calf brain pie was a delicacy in some cultures. Eye appeal is buy appeal, yelled Lenny. When sending out a bone-in sirloin steak, always show the smaller side of the bone. Repackage the chopped meat when it starts turning a little dark. And always, always check the dates. When time allowed, I was taught how to bone out rounds. Rounds is the hind leg, shoulders, and necks of beef. The neck contained many spine-type bones, and the neck meat made the best chop meat. Make sure to get all the meat from those bones, kid. That's money. Around 4:30 on most days, the butchers would ante up loose change for a pint of Fleischmann's rye whiskey, 90 proof. As the kid, I was sent to the local liquor store to pick up this brown bag of warmth and happiness. But I was not included in this hour that the men referred to as choir practice, held in a storage fridge in the rear. After about 3 or 4 months, they finally invited me in to join them for a drink, I thought. We do all the work here, so we share in the profits, said Lenny. He then explained the profit in the form of a belly package. The guys would wrap meat in butcher paper and tie it up tightly with a string. They would then place the package between their stomach and their belt. We feed our families here. The loose, heavy clothing worn all year by the men would help conceal most belly pats as they walked past the manager and wishing him good night. Do you pay board? Asked Lenny. Here, bring home some nice center-cut pork chops for your mother. I was now one of the guys, a thief. A guy called the Water Buffalo would close with a toast to the choir. Here is to the smell of fresh sawdust and whiskey. Our day is done. Around the holidays, these journeyman butchers would show off their skills for special orders. Standing rib roasts, crown roasts, front-cut brisket, round steak sliced very thin for braciole, or the German rouladen. Fresh hams, bone-rolled and tied, were very popular. I lasted for about 2 years before entering the military. I learned some about butchering, but more about the way of the world and the profit motive.
Leah Moore is the next writer-performer listed on your program, but late yesterday she contacted me with the sad news that she has the flu and is in quarantine at home. And we wish Leah a gentle ride in recovery. Luckily, writer MJ Flood was available on short notice to step in with a supermarket piece of his own. MJ has been a high school writing and literature teacher for more than 2 decades. A lifetime writer who had never submitted for publication, MJ started submitting his own work when a student told him, "Hey, Mr. Flood, you're always telling us stories. You should be writing them down." Since then, MJ has published online essays. He's written a memoir about grief. He's produced a short film in American Sign Language, which won the 2018 Chain New York City Film Festival Best Original Idea Award. He writes about love, loss, and family, and he's currently at work on a second book and a documentary. He says he is, above all things, a husband, a father, an unwitting dog lover. He's also a very occasional supermarket shopper, and his story shares a title with a song from The Clash. Some of you may be old enough to remember. The piece is called All Lost in the Supermarket, and this is MJ Flood.
I used to love the supermarket. Clean, quiet, orderly. When I was a child, trailing behind my mother in King Cullen, I'd straighten all the boxes, bottles, and bags on the shelves, organize coupons, and pack shopping bags by category. I was a supermarket savant. In fact, when my wife and I started out together, I was the one who knew how to find the cheapest items, to multitask the deli, dairy, and the butcher, and to navigate the aisles for speed and efficiency. But somehow I grew to hate the supermarket. I can't exactly say why. I'm not a Neanderthal. I just guess that when we had kids, our domestic duties shifted. I got the toolbox, she got the coupons. So it had been a while since I went to a grocery store when in April 2019, my wife asked me to go for her. I'm an obliging husband, so I said okay. She texted me her lengthy list. I felt immediately disoriented. Why do we need all of this? Why is everything organic? It's 3 times the price, you know. I texted my concerns to my wife. I could tell her tone from her texted reply, just get what's on the list. My frustrated confusion increased when I entered the supermarket. Things had changed. When did we stop providing plastic bags? When did we start paying for bags? Why do I need a degree in information and technology to operate a scale in the produce section? And when, in God's name, did Stop and Shop get a robot? I'm there dancing around R2-D2 when all I wanted was the organic, non-GMO, anti-antibiotic, grass-fed, 30% lean chopped meat. I was confused. Every item on my wife's list eluded me. I lost track of what I'd already gotten and what was left on the list. I felt stupid. I felt lost. I felt overwhelmed. I couldn't concentrate. This wasn't always this difficult, was it? I felt like Steve Martin in that movie, Father of the Bride, just about to snap. While staring at 2 identical gallon milk containers, somehow astronomically different in price, I swear the whole shelf shook. It shifted. I felt unbalanced, like my knees buckled. It was a panic attack for sure. I'd had them before, but this was more physical than ever. Frightened, I left the cart in the dairy section and hurried to my car. Trembling, I sat down in the driver's seat and tried to breathe. I texted my wife. I was in the store, don't know what happened, had a panic attack. She replied with a caps-locked, "What?" followed by the interrobang. At Stop and Shop, I texted back. Felt like I lost balance, almost fell over. I couldn't finish the shopping. I tried calming down while I watched the iMessage dots bubbling on my screen. My phone pinged my wife's response. You didn't have a panic attack, jackass. We just had an earthquake. I read her response dubiously, then quickly consulted Google. Yep, she was right. An earthquake on Long Island. Go figure. Somewhat embarrassed with myself, I FaceTimed my wife, who, deserving an opportunity to see me as she mocked me, said, "We had an earthquake, and you thought you had a panic attack. Why? Because shopping is too stressful for you?" "I don't know. I felt like I was going to fall over. How was I supposed to know it was an earthquake?" She breathed. "Well, I'm glad it wasn't a panic attack," she said. "And I'm glad you weren't injured in the earthquake. But can you go back inside and finish the shopping?" I said yes, re-entered the store where some kid was cleaning up a jar of Prego that probably fell in the trimmer, and found my cart just as I'd left it in the dairy aisle. I grabbed the more expensive milk and paid for the contents at the self-checkout before I went home to keep the groceries and then to take a nap because, you know, the supermarket makes me crazy.
Gary Zenker is a marketing strategist and copywriter who also creates flash fiction tales that cross genre and focus on revealing facets of human nature. And be careful what you say in front of Gary because it might end up in his next story. Some of which have been selected for various print anthologies and websites, including Chicken Soup for the Soul, Laughter. Gary founded 2 writers groups in southeastern Pennsylvania, and after 15 years, continues to run the Mainline Writers Group, helping writers develop their skills and achieve their writing goals. He also runs the annual Noir at the Bar, benefiting the Oxford, Pennsylvania Public Library, spotlighting local authors. On the very day that submissions for this topic were due, Gary wrote and submitted Everyday Magic right at the buzzer, and he traveled today to our New York City stage from his home in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, which makes him the first runner-up for today's Longest Commute Award. Please give a very warm welcome to Gary Zenker.
In the Zenker family, it was the males who went food shopping at the supermarket. Maybe it's a throwback to cavemen who hunted while their women stayed home, awaiting their testosterone-driven cave mates to drag home a carcass and complain, "Where am I going to put that?" Maybe it was just my dad wanting to give my mom a break from the 3 urchins she tried to manage daily, while he worked in a more civilized environment as an accountant. Either way, it was the way it was. Dad turned the weekly chore into something fun. In those days, it was just what we did, but now I know enough to call it everyday magic. We walked up and down every aisle of our shopping list, frequently buying off-list items based simply on a label exclamation of new or improved. In the cereal aisle, he gave us time to evaluate every box for the potential prize it contained and allowed us three each, despite Mom's constant ranting over the volume of sugar they contained. My brother Steve would run ahead, squeeze into a refrigerator unit that used baffles instead of doors, and waited for my father with his cart to reach the locations. Sometimes a customer or manager would find my brother first and remove him, but only sometimes. "Should we get one of those?" I asked, and pointed at my brother, who posed in an exaggerated way that 5-year-olds consider funny. Dad laughed each and every time. Rounding the packaged meat area, the wrapped ground sausage was a favorite. "Come here," Dad would demand, and when we approached, he would summarily bonk each of us in the head, careful not to pierce the thin plastic film. Then he would put the package back on the shelf. We were Jewish. Bacon was apparently fine. Sliced ham was acceptable on a sandwich. Pork spare ribs were a delight when they came from those cardboard containers with a thin metal handle. But somehow, sausage was verboten and never made an entrance into our home. I've never fully understood the Judaic dietary laws. My dad had the worst digestion ever, as evidenced by the frequency and pungency of gas he purged on a regular basis. We'd be walking down the aisle when he would suddenly announce, "We need to get out of here." We had just seconds before the invisible cloud would hit us, so we moved quickly to the next aisle, where the same scenario would often repeat. We learned to double back in our weekly market excursions, giving Mom extra time away from the kids and the chaos. It was important to end the trip with the unveiling of the day's finds. And when we finally returned home, Mom would be forced to watch each item pulled from the brown paper bags. Long before supersized retail containers were common, he'd buy one oversized commercial package of soup or canned carrots or tuna to present to Mom. "What am I gonna do with that?" she would complain each time. Dad would just wink and smile at us. So maybe there was more to that caveman comparison than first realized. The love for supermarket shopping was embedded in each of us. Many years later, as we were preparing for my father's shiva at the house, Mom needed something from the market. The kids volunteered to go together. Our shopping list was short, but it gave us the opportunity to do something normal on a day that was anything but. As we approached a familiar aisle, one item caught my eye. I looked at my siblings and their eyes narrowed. As a salute to my father, we each picked up a sausage roll and banged each other on the heads. Then we placed them back on the shelf and finished our shopping excursion, our tribute to the best father ever.
Debra Freed lives in Greenwich Village with her husband and just post-college twins, and she is very happy when she's reading, baking, or riding a bike on a boardwalk. She spent the last 25 years working in advertising as a creative director, and the work she's most known for and most proud of is the launch of Dove's award-winning Campaign for Real Beauty. There you go. In addition to widening the parameters of beauty, she has also done her part to widen America's hips and put baubles on its wrists with advertising clients that run the gamut from Hellmann's Mayonnaise to Tiffany & Company. Debra has a newsletter on Substack where she writes about clothing and life, but not in that order. And her work has been published by the New York Times. She returns to our stage today with a story about shopping for treats for her mother at her local market and how that activity changed as her mother did. Please welcome back writer Debra Freed.
I stare at the apples lined up like beauty contestants at my corner market. Do I need a pound? 2? Annoyed with myself, I call my mother. "Hi, F. I'm at Garden of Eden. How many apples do I need for a crisp?" I ask. Immediately, she's deep in her recipe box. I can hear the flipping of index cards. 10 tart apples, she reads with the precision of a former teacher. I'm back an hour later. I forgot pecans. I can guess how many I need, but my mother likes going into her recipes, and I like her voice, so I call. And I keep calling whenever I forget a recipe. But during the next year, it takes longer for her to find them. Sometimes she can't. Sometimes she's coughing when she answers, so I don't ask. The following year, there are 3 hospital stays that go the way they always do for old people, badly. After the last such stay, when I call from the market, it's her aide who answers. "Here, Florence," she says, holding the phone to my mother's ear. Her hello is still sweet, but muffled. "Hi, F. I'm getting lunch. Do you want little hot dogs or mini spanakopita?" I ask. She says both, and 2 hours later, I'm in her living room. She sits in the chair where she's always sat happily knitting. Now her busy hands are still. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispers. I smile. She sighs. Long hospice brings out the best in no one. She rests until the oven timer goes off and I return from the kitchen. "Hors d'oeuvres for lunch," I say, and fleetingly her eyes twinkle. "Let's pretend we're at a bar mitzvah," I offer, cutting a little hot dog into pieces. "I wish I'd dressed better, but I guess they won't kick me out," she says with a laugh. I touch her velour-covered shoulder, alarmed at its boniness. I grab my laptop. It's time for YouTube videos. "Let's start with Tevye," I suggest, and she lifts her brows and smiles. Topol sings "If I Were a Rich Man" as we take bites of spanakopita. When it's over, we clap as if we're in the front row. I find another. Look at the way you operate that thing, she marvels, genuinely impressed with my YouTube skills. Barbara Streisand sings People, and we hold hands. I ask who she wants next. Liza, she whispers. We're like two gay men, I say. And she happily agrees, but I don't think she knows what I mean. As Liza belts out Cabaret, I wince at the line, what good is sitting alone in your room? My mother has lots of visitors and good care, but still, she's alone in her room, wandering the empty space between life and death. This is a limbo with no bar mitzvah DJ and no music, only the fear of finding out how low you can go. Every few days, I search the market's freezer for new hors d'oeuvres, quiches, knishes, and dumplings that we swoon over. Sometimes she barely eats. Others, she finishes everything, which can take a full hour. She chews slowly, drifting off between bites. Time drags, and then suddenly it runs out. It's been 9 months since I was a New Jersey Transit regular, 9 months since I jumped when the phone rang at night, 9 months without the person who carried me for that amount of time and then proceeded to carry me for the rest of my life. Lately at Garden of Eden, I linger in the frozen section, looking through the glass like a teenager window shopping at Brandy Melville. I smile sadly at the little hot dogs, like old friends I've lost touch with. Sometimes I reach for them, but then I freeze. I stay that way, filled with longing for something that'll never taste the same again.
Born and bred in New York City, in his younger days, Jay Lloyd was often called a beach bum, a boat bum, and occasionally a ski bum. He actually was all those things while holding full-time jobs as a broadcaster in Bermuda, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and even a stint at Radio Netherlands in Holland, always managing to combine work with fun. His education came with 4 years at sea and in the air as a U.S. Coast Guard radio operator. The skiing part arrived when he settled in Philadelphia. It wasn't the Alps, but the Poconos, and he says a weekly ski column helped. In Philly, he found his niche as a broadcast journalist, spending the next 57 years with a front row seat to national and local events before retiring from CBS All News Radio and moving back to New York City just in time for the pandemic. Jay and his social worker wife Mary settled here for the beaches, the boating, and their 2 adult Manhattanite kids, Spencer and Kat, and they all enjoy ferry rides to Rockaway. Jay's contribution to our supermarket-themed event is an essay entitled "The Chicken Was Naked." Please give a warm writer's read. Welcome to writer Jay Lloyd.
I was 7. That was 83 years ago. But even then, I knew my eyes did not lie. That pasty white lump sitting in a cooler case, wrapped in plastic, it was a chicken. The sign said so. While I was holding my dad's hand in a Grand Union on Washington Heights, he called this organized jumble of boxes, cans, produce, meat, and what passed for bread a supermarket. But who ever heard of a headless, footless, bare, naked chicken? Mom wasn't with us. She and my kid sister were doing the real shopping. In their world, chickens with heads were hanging by their necks on hooks. They had feet and were covered with brown mottled feathers. Dead to be sure, but you could recognize them. She shopped at the Jewish butcher, except when they argued about too many pin feathers left after the bird was plucked. Then she went to the Italian butcher right across the street. The sawdust on the floor, the butcher block, and the layout was the same. So was the chicken. I didn't figure the chicken cared much who killed it. But then there was the produce store owned by my friend Frankie Russo's dad, and the bakery run by Walter Bodenstein's family. Vinnie Appicella's father was a fishmonger where Mom got her fin food ground for gefilte fish. There was Dave's Delicatessen, the appetizer store, the Baltic Bakery, and Frischling's Market. It sold canned goods, milk, butter, and eggs. They were the gastronomic heart of the neighborhood. People feared the supermarkets would put them out of business. But then, who would Mom argue with? And where would all our friends and neighbors go? Miami? Eventually, but not yet. Now you got to remember, Mom and the other women who stayed with their stores were married during the Great Depression. They practiced frugality like it was a religion. And so on Saturdays, Dad got a list of canned goods that was on sale at the A&P in Grand Union. As I got older, I went to one with half the list, Dad went to the other. But we both got a stern warning from Mom. Don't walk past Frischling's with bags on the way home. What, was Carl Frischling's father supposed to think that our family lived on nothing but milk and eggs? Besides, when I looked for my first job, I was 12. I went to Mr. Frischling and asked for work. Pointing, he said, "Sure, take those cases to the back and stack them on the floor." I almost got a hernia. Nothing budged. Well, seeing my disappointment, he told me he'd save the job until I get older. I don't think the supermarket would have done that. But then, finally, it had to happen. Frischling's, Appicella's, the bakery, all the rest, came to the end of their days. Now, it wasn't the supermarkets that had anything to do with their demise. It was a demand for changing flavors that rolled the dice. The old Jews, Italians, and Irish, well, they retired. And with Mom and Dad among them, moved like a herd to warmer climes. Miami Beach looked like a clone of Washington Heights. But then, an amazing thing happened. On assignment in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, I was looking for the best eatery in town. Go to Wegmans, I was told. A supermarket? Well, the voice again said, "Wegmans, down by the river, go." I went. A food court like I had never seen. It boasted traditional comfort food and more complex dishes that were works of art, all cooked in the store by professional chefs. The supermarket, well, it was wrapped around the eatery. It held virtually every store I knew as a kid. There was a bakery that spun out incomparable bagels. Locke's was nearby. The butcher shop displayed custom cuts. An amazing display of fresh seafood sported heads and tails. Produce included baby bok choy. It was a groaning Vord version of the Land of Oz. But the chicken, it was still naked and headless. Oh boy, so plump.
Cindy Clement Carlson is the mother of 3 kids, all raised in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. She was at work in the Sandy Hook School Library Media Center, and her daughter was present on the day of the December 2012 shooting. Cindy has written widely about her experience at Sandy Hook School with publications in the Newtowner, Marie Claire, School Library Journal, and the book, If I Don't Make It, I Love You, Survivors in the Aftermath of School Shootings. Cindy currently serves as Director of Communications and Major Giving at WMNR Fine Arts Radio, a classical music station in Connecticut, and she returns to our stage with her contribution to our supermarket-themed event, an essay entitled, When the Shoppers Rush Home. Please welcome back writer Cindy Clement Carlson.
The supermarket gift card is for a local grocery store, the Big Y, from my union, given to me as a staff member at Sandy Hook School. It is December 2012, and 20 first graders and 6 educators have been killed by a gunman. Desperate with shock, people in town are trying to do something, anything, and what my union representatives have come up with is a $500 gift card. Generous for sure, but unbearable. I feel embarrassed by it. It's transactional. Sheltered students from gunfire in a school library closet, here, have some money. The gift card doesn't meet the moment for me. So I give it to the local food pantry in the basement of the Episcopal Church in Sandy Hook Center, just over the hill from where first responders are cordoning off classrooms and counting bullet casings. I don't want the gift card, but I still need the supermarket. I have 3 kids, 9, 12, and 15. My 9-year-old was also in the school that morning. 20 families lost kids, but mine still need goldfish, milk, apples. And the shooting is 11 days before Christmas. Shoppers force themselves to do holiday errands, even as traffic halts for funeral processions that cross the town every few hours. In the Big Y, I notice comfort food shoppers have sought ice cream, and the freezer case is picked over. The disposable aluminum pans are completely sold out. Everyone's taking food to everyone, but there's a hierarchy. Someone from a neighboring town brings food to her friend who lives in Sandy Hook, but she in turn brings food to me because I was at work in the school. But I bring food to a woman who's lost her son. And as I pass through the supermarket, I'm flabbergasted that anyone is even out there buying pans in the first place. Why would anyone dare leave the house when it's clear that it's so easy for someone to shoot us? My supermarket routine now includes planning where to hide. My best idea is to slide in behind the big packages of paper towels. I know it's best to keep my phone on me, but muted. When the inevitable shooting breaks out, I will abandon my cart and burrow behind the paper towels. I can make a farewell call, but no ringing will give my place away. If I'm not near the paper towels, maybe I'll make a run for the receiving area behind the dairy section. It would be best not to be caught in the middle of the store because I can't count on cans or salad dressing to cover me up. In the aisles, mothers sidle their carts next to each other and ask, "Where were you when you heard? How many gone from your brownie troop? How many killed in your Sunday school class?" I run into acquaintances who know I work at Sandy Hook School, and I feel them assessing how much to ask me about what it was really like. I don't know what to do when I see a mother in the store whose first grader was killed. I have heard a grieving mother say it makes it worse when people avoid her. I have heard a grieving mother say it makes it worse when people approach her. It was easier when a Christmas grocery store encounter between moms was a chuckle over whether the candy canes were made in China. But for now, until this awful season passes, I can hope that the gift card that made me uncomfortable made a terrible time easier for a mom already stretched thin. Maybe it went to a parent who buried her daughter, or a coach who lost half his t-ball team. Maybe it encouraged someone out of the house and into the store where she found sympathy and community in the aisles of the local supermarket.
John Pielmeier began his career with the play and the movie Agnes of God, followed by 3 more plays on Broadway and over 25 produced television, movies, and miniseries. His adaptation of William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist opens in October here in New York, and a revival of Agnes is in the works for London. He's received the Humanitas, Edgar, Camey, and Christopher Awards, 5 Writers Guild Award nominations, and his projects have been nominated for the Emmy and Golden Globe. John and his wife, writer Irene O'Garden, live in the Hudson Highlands, and he returns to our stage to close Act 1 of our show with a story that's partly about growing up in a supermarket. The piece is called Over Home, and this is John Pielmeier.
When I was in college, I was picked up for shoplifting a wheel of Gouda from the A&P. But that's not the story I want to tell. Instead, I'm going to tell you something about who I am. My paternal grandfather was a philanderer, drunk, child beater, and a very mean man. I'm named for him. He and my grandmother raised a family of 8, and to support them, they turned the front room of their rented house into a grocery store. In time, they built their own store from the ground up with a second-floor apartment where the family lived. There was nothing super about Pielmeier's Market. My grandmother ran it, and my grandfather's death didn't affect the business in the least. In 1945, my father, returning from the war, was offered a job with the National Red Cross, a good job, I believe, but his mother made a counteroffer, which he accepted. He and his sister Maria became equal partners in the business, and every day at 7, he left our house across town and drove over home to the store. By the time I was growing, 3 of his sisters were working there too. My Aunt Maria as butcher and co-owner, my Aunt Agnes as shelf stocker and order filler, and my Aunt Margaret as bookkeeper. Over home was as much a home to me as the house I grew up in. My mother's family I visited on Thanksgiving, but my father's I saw nearly every day. Weekdays after school, I worked at the store filling orders, stocking soda pop, straightening the storage room. Sunday dinners were eaten in the aunt's kitchen. My dad and I would, on occasion, visit the United Home Dressed Meat Company, where my Aunt Margaret worked, and which, despite the fact that it was the local slaughterhouse, was the cleanest place I've ever seen. He took me to the warehouse, where I would wander among towers of boxed canned goods while Dad placed an order. He took me candy shopping, which was not as fun as it sounds because I was never allowed to sample the merchandise. Twice a year, the store closed for inventory, and I spent 2 tedious days counting soup cans, toilet paper, bananas. In October, I helped make sauerkraut, and the Christmas holidays were spent filling paper cartons with this Pielmeier specialty. Once, I even contributed to the daily chaos. When I was 5, my dad's delivery truck collided with me in the alley behind the store, and the terrified teenage diner driver had to tell my father, "I just ran over your son." But it wasn't really the store that made me. It was the people, the customers, the employees, the time I spent with Dad buying candy or sides of beef. Most especially, it was the aunts, Maria, Margaret, and Agnes, who insisted I call them by their first names and who shaped me into who I am today. They never married, victims, I suspect, of my grandfather's abuse, but they were always full of quiet love and generous laughter. And here's the key: they were wonderful storytellers. The last time I saw Maria, she was sitting in front of a Christmas fireplace telling my wife to be a tale about the sole Christmas present my grandfather gave her year after year, a doll she was allowed to play with for one day. Or the time my near-deaf father set off the store's burglar alarm and never had a clue. She told of the Depression-era customers who bought groceries on credit and never paid us back. Oh, I could go on, because that's who I am, a storyteller after my aunts. So let me finish another story. The A&P detective made me empty my pockets And when I pulled out the red earmuffs he'd mistaken for a red waxed wheel of Gouda, he apologized and quietly let me exit out the back.
Writers Read gives voice to the stories that bind us, and we're a federally recognized 501c3 nonprofit literary organization with a mission to create performance opportunities for writers. And we also create memorable experiences for our guests with events like this one, gathering to share stories and food and wine, which are things that nourish us all. We are working to scale up and attract more writers, more followers, more listeners, and make the work of these talented writers available to an even wider audience. A portion of the ticket you purchase for today's show does flow through to us from City Winery, but the actual funds that keep our wheels turning come from you, our friends, and our donors. Your donations are an investment to help us reach the next level. And I ask you to please consider a tax-deductible gift today in any amount to help us get there. Scanning the code on the back of your program or the green banner in the gallery will take you to the donation page on our website. But another way you could help would be to take your program home with you. Don't leave it behind. Take it with you and pass it along to a writer that you know who might like to appear on our stage, or to someone who you think might enjoy an afternoon of storytelling like we're experiencing and enjoying today. So anyone who you think might be interested in what we do, just pass that along. That would make you an ambassador. That would make you an assistant to what we're doing. So thank you. We're going to pause here for 15 minutes for your service to take food orders and to refill your glasses. You will hear me ring a bell, which I left in the green room, at which point I ask you to head back to your seats for the second half of the show and more great stories. I am Ed McCann, and this is Writers Read. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Welcome back to the second half of our supermarket-themed show here at City Winery on the west side of New York City. Before we bring up the next writer, I want to thank the folks who helped make this event in this great space possible, from the people here in the house, from our servers, our editors. I'm especially grateful to our Writers Read editors and board members who help steer the organization. And a special announcement, we have our new intern, SUNY New Paltz digital media production major, Quincy Simmons, who is working his very first gig here with us today. Let's give him a hand of his own. George Manis opens Act 2 of today's show. And so let me tell you a couple of things about him. He moved to New York City in 1984 to make his fortune. He didn't make a fortune, however, most likely because after spending a few years carrying around lighting equipment on video shoots, he started writing and ended up working as a journalist. He stuck around anyway, and since 2017, he has worked as an editor at AARP, the magazine, and the AARP Bulletin, which is the largest circulation magazine in the US, which is tied to all of us who are now over 50. You're going to get it, whether you know it or not. And at AARP, he is in charge of personal finance coverage. So George also has a weakness for collecting things that no one else values, including souvenir air sickness bags, do not disturb signs from hotels, and the two most prized books in his library are a rare copy of Red Channels and an original edition of Ouija's Naked City. His current obsession is collecting and trying to repair old manual typewriters. So if you happen to have an extra Smith Corona Skywriter or an Adler Tipper on your hands, please let him know. And also, if you're old enough, the title of George's contribution to our show about supermarkets may start a certain 1970s hit song from Sly Stone playing in your head. The piece is called It's a Fairway Affair. Please join me in welcoming back to the Writers Read stage, George Manis.
A few years back, I read a disturbing story about a woman accused of shoplifting from my neighborhood grocery store, Fairway Market. What disturbed me wasn't the crime, but the punishment. Fairway had banned the woman from the store for life. This gave me chills. I told my wife, I cannot imagine living in New York City and never being able to walk into Fairway again. I was serious. The Upper West Side store billed itself as like no other market, and it was. They cooked their delicious roast turkey in-house. They sold 24 varieties of loose tea. At the self-serve olive bar, there were 28 different types to choose from. Fairway was crowded, noisy, and chaotic, all narrow aisles and sharp elbows. Shopping there was like shopping in a subway car. It felt like New York. My attachment to Fairway began innocently enough. 3 mornings a week, after a run in Central Park, I'd drop by the store on my way home to pick up a gallon of milk for my 2 growing boys, plus other groceries. As I returned to Fairway again and again, I grew to love its quirks and qualities, its unwritten rules, like the proper direction for moving through the vegetable aisle. The sign at the deli counter saying that asking for fat to be trimmed from the guanciale was an insult to good taste. The chance to grab fresh bagels from delivery trays early in the morning. And the people. Donna and Mercedes at checkout. Roberto and Roberta slicing challah at the bread counter. Peter Romano, the restless king of the produce department. I still have this memory of seeing him lost in thought one morning, ripping apart bunches of bananas just to keep his hands busy. You know a relationship is strong when you can speak frankly about sensitive topics. Like the day I emailed Fairway's manager, I quote, "It seems to me that in recent months, the everything bagels and the sesame bagels have a lot less everything and sesame seeds on them." She emailed back in less than an hour. Again, I quote, "I will address the bagel situation immediately." And she did. Another sign of a close relationship. When your partner isn't taking care of himself, you speak up. Like one morning when one of the cashiers said to me, "You're not running as much as you used to." That stung, but she was right. Sadly, all the things that once drew me to Fairway began to disappear. One day, instead of the 3 grades of prosciutto at the deli, there were none. The Fairway I thought I knew would have died of shame. But the new guy behind the counter showed no embarrassment. The pumpernickel bagels disappeared. Then the cilantro pesto. Roberto and Roberta. I realized one day they were gone. Peter Romano left too. Afterward, in the produce department, someone put up a sign. "Bananas are like family. Don't break them up." This was not the Fairway I fell in love with. When I noticed once again that the everything bagels were short on the everything, I said nothing. What was the point? We had drifted apart. Still, the first time I visited our neighborhood's new Trader Joe's, it felt like cheating on Fairway. When, some weeks later, I carried Trader Joe's bags into Fairway, there to pick up a few items TJ's didn't stock, again I felt guilty, like I was flaunting my infidelity. Now, years later, Trader Joe's is my go-to grocery store, and I'm long over the guilt of my Fairway breakup. The good times we shared, I still treasure them. And I came away with a life lesson that extends far beyond grocery stores. Not all of the close relationships that give us joy are meant to last forever. Sometimes they have a limited shelf life.
Kristen Gaerlan is a creative director and nonfiction writer based here in New York City. Her roots are in the Bronx, but the roots to her roots are in the Philippines. Kristen earned her BBA at George Washington University only to put her business degree aside and start out as a copywriter. And she adds, "Sorry, Mom and Dad." Now an award-winning creative director with over 12 years' experience in the ad and PR industry, she has written for Fortune 500 companies, Broadway productions, and nonprofit organizations. And Kristen, I would like to talk to you more about that after the show. Kristen's creative nonfiction work has been published in McSweeney's, The Rumpus, and Bustle, and as a first-time mom, she is absolutely obsessed with her baby girl, Vanessa, who you might have heard a little earlier, who I should point out is, at 6 months, our youngest ever audience member. And she is here with her date and her dad, Owen. Kristen's supermarket story involves monthly team shopping trips with her aging mother, whom she is actually more like than she might care to admit. The story is entitled The Right Way, and making her first trip to the Writers' Read stage, this is Kristen Gaerlan.
My mom and I eat shrimp with piles of shells stacked between us. In the middle of 99 Ranch's eatery, we rummage through the tails, legs, and antennae that litter our tray. The orange stir-fry marinade makes its way onto every corner of the styrofoam container we share. This desperate act would mark the end of the feast for some, but not for us. We get to the best part, the head. The right way to eat shrimp involves sucking the juice from its head. Do whatever you'd like with the actual meat, saute it, broil it, deep fry it, but whatever you do, do not forget the head. Twist it off its body, slurp the orange guts wedged behind its charcoal eyes, act as if it's your life's objective to kill the sea critter twice. That's how Filipinos eat shrimp. In the comfort of 99 Ranch, my mother and I have no problem using this ethnic AF technique. We've become frequent guests of this Asian supermarket's Hackensack location since her move to New Jersey. After 30 years in our Bronx 2-bedroom apartment, my single mother has downsized to a 1-bedroom house in the burbs. Every month, I'd commute from my home in Brooklyn to accompany her on grocery runs. Together, we'd stock up her new home. As I motion to trash our scraps, Mom stops me. She swipes the styrofoam container, ties it up in a plastic bag, and tosses it into our Marc by Marc Jacobs tote. Seriously? There's hardly any left, I tell her. Can you stop? Her accent becomes more pronounced, and it always does in situations beyond her control. And for my mother, saving leftovers is beyond her control. Lugging our bounty into her house, I stub my toe in a container of tax documents circa 2002. Those are important, Mom reminds me. You never know. With stacks of cardboard boxes, plastic crates, and unhung paintings, her home's entryway looks more like a storage unit. Why are you hoarding this crap, I ask. My mom doesn't respond. Her facial expression simply conveys the surprise of an assault. She can't believe I used that word. Hoarding was an ugly term reserved for freaks with their own TLC reality show. She's not hoarding. She simply has kalat, the Tagalog word for clutter. As her American-born child, I can't tell the difference between the two. In Manila, Mom's possessions were limited to a handful of outfits, a couple of shoes, and a shared bedroom for 4 siblings. Whatever belongings they had were considered not as home essentials, but as blessings. Each item possessed hope for a better life, and such hope proved to be fruitful. I was raised in an upper-middle-class neighborhood, had the resources to land a well-paying job, and earned a salary to fund my home's bougie aesthetic. A life made possible, thanks to my mom's frugality. As much as I long for her to throw caution to the wind, toss out her leftovers, and live the life she's achieved, my longing will always come from a privileged lens. Maybe I should just sell the house, Mom sighs, gazing at the boxes around her. She does it with a self-deprecating laugh that breaks my heart. Maybe it's all too much for me. No, it just takes time. I smile and give her a hand. Before I head to Brooklyn, she packs me a bundle of leftovers containing my favorite Filipino dishes, and loads them into an old Christmas bag, one that I fold up and store in my closet, the place where I keep reused gift bags, recycled tissue paper, and piles of re-gifts. My husband asks why I bother holding on to this clutter. Those are important, I remind him. You never know.
Allan Yashin is a lifelong resident of New York City who now calls Stuyvesant Town his home. He's retired after 34 years in the New York City school system as a teacher and counselor and sought a new life in the world of entertainment. Through luck, coincidence, and living in the city with the most talented people in the world, Allan joined a professional improv company, which led him to forge a life as a writer who looks for the humorous side of everyday life, something he's done in dozens of plays, performed on various stages here in the city. Allan's the author of the novel Protected, and like writer John Pielmeier, who you met earlier, Allan, too, grew up in a supermarket, a story he shares in The Man I Never Knew. Please give a warm welcome to Allan Yashin.
My father owned a supermarket on the Lower East Side. At least that's what they told me, but I never saw it. Why? Because I didn't know him. Now, I know what you might be thinking. No, my parents weren't divorced when I was young, and no, I was not born out of wedlock. It was just that my father and I were strangers to one another. When my father got home from his long day at the supermarket that he owned, he seemed to show no interest in me. He never asked a question about what I did in school that day or tell me anything about what happened in the store. My mother, Claire, told me he was tired from his long days, and I suppose as he was. And as the years went by, I accepted this detachment from me as a normal thing. And even the times we were alone together, just the two of us, we were still apart. But when I was a young boy, on the Sundays that he didn't work, my father would often take a car ride back to the Lower East Side where his store was. My mother would say, "Jack, take Allan with you. You never spend any time with him." So reluctantly, my father agreed to take me in the car. And as we were driving over the Williamsburg Bridge, I always felt so uneasy in his company that I couldn't think of a thing to say or ask him. But we finally got to the Lower East Side. Was it to show me his grocery store? No. He parked the car on Delancey Street in front of a candy store and told me to wait while he went inside. Then after a while, he came back, did his one fatherly act. He bought me an ice cream cone, which I ate in silence as we drove back over the bridge to our home in Williamsburg. Matter of fact, it wasn't until years later that my mother finally told me the reason for those trips to that candy store on Sundays. It was to pay the bookie in that candy store the money he owed him for his gambling debts. Well, by the time I was in boys' high school, nothing had changed between us. All those years of silence continued. I could only think he was a quiet, repressed man who just didn't know how to connect to others. Now, then one day, when I was about 17, we had moved to East New York and Brooklyn because now he owned a grocery store in Canarsie. And he came to me one day from out of nowhere and said, "My partner is sick. Would you come into the store today and fill up the stocks and the shelves that need stocking?" And I said, "Oh, this is my chance to finally see the family grocery store and maybe finally connect with my father." So when we arrived in the store on Avenue L in Canarsie, he said, "Go in the back room. If there are cans there in his room, put them on the shelves. That's what you have to do." Then he went to the front of the store, took the close sign, flipped it to opened the door, and he took his place by the cash register in front of the store. The first customer walked into the store, and then it happened. My father greeted him with a big hello and a big smile, and they had this conversation about how the Brooklyn Dodgers had wiped the Phillies with the floor last night, and they laughed and smiled. Startled, I stared in amazement about this going on. I had never seen my father act so gregariously before in my whole life, and this continued all day long with every customer that came into the store. He was a totally different person in that store than he was ever at home. He was relaxed and seemed to derive great pleasure from each interaction. It was a revelation to me, but a sad one. He had never talked to me in such an easy, natural way, or to tell the truth, with my mother either. No, that day I witnessed the man I never knew.
Andrew Hague wants you to know, right at the top, that he has absolutely no writing credits. Let's get that right out of the way. What we do know about Andrew is that he was born in New York City in 1956 to parents who were involved in musical theater. And, fun fact, when Andy was still a young boy, his late father, Albert Hague, compared the music for several Broadway shows, though perhaps he's best remembered for his work writing the music for You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch. The 1966 animated special, Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Albert Hague was also an actor, most notably in the film and TV series Fame, where he played Swarovski, the music teacher you may remember. Anyway, I love a good digression as well as anyone else, so let's get that out of the way. Anyway, Andy grew up, as we all do, hopefully, and he went on to create a telecom company before starting his consulting practice as a telecommunications consultant. Andy and his wife Monica are Hudson Valley weekenders, and they attended their very first Writers' Read event in October, which was our very special 10th anniversary event. And that event inspired Andy to write something for our supermarket prompt in the story he submitted to our editors entitled Emergency Shopping Spree. Please give a warm welcome to Andy Hague.
Around 8:30 on a glorious September morning, I was walking to my local corner deli in Manhattan, and my wife-to-be had just left my apartment on the Upper West Side, and I had decided to treat myself to a sausage, egg, and cheese sandwich, not my usual routine. But I had this warm, tingling glow inside, life was good, and I just decided I was going to treat myself. After placing my order, I stepped back and joined the others waiting for their hot breakfast, some of whom, like me, were watching the news on the silent TV on near the ceiling. And there I was watching a video clip of what appeared to be the wreckage and fire caused by a small plane crashing into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. There was soft murmuring all around me. I thought it strange that a plane had hit the World Trade Center in such perfect weather. When I got home, I turned the TV on, desperate to learn more about this strange accident, and like millions of others in Manhattan and around the country, I was horrified and stunned as the events of 9/11 unfolded. At first, I felt punched in the stomach and lay on my bed in disbelief, but then it occurred to me I might need emergency provisions. Minutes later, I was running to my local Food City supermarket on West 95th Street and Columbus in a panic. I was in such a rush to enter that I pushed against the automatic doors as they opened, on a mission to prepare for the Armageddon that might be coming. At Food City, my panic and horror were replaced by an intense focus on buying food for an emergency. The supermarket was basically empty, which was normal for a Tuesday morning. But there I was, running down the aisles, flinging my shopping cart around the corners, as if other desperate shoppers might empty the shelves before I could get to them. I stuffed my cart with cans of tuna, boxes of pasta, and other staples, all in larger quantities than I had ever bought before. By the time I made it to the checkout counter, my heart was racing, but I had to wait for the customer ahead of me to pay. During that anxious minute or two, I began taking stock of the situation. I took a deep breath and looked around the store. When I arrived, it was empty. But now, just minutes later, it was rapidly filling up with people who, like me, were racing to stock up, and who also seemed panicked and bewildered. It gave me comfort, because in that moment, I realized that I was not alone, and there were others like me who had switched into survival mode. The momentary sense of relief I felt having secured provisions to sustain me through whatever might happen next was quickly replaced by fear and foreboding. I don't remember if I walked or ran to my apartment. I don't remember many other details of that emergency shopping spree, now decades in the past. The world had changed just minutes earlier, and my local food city was no longer just my neighborhood supermarket. It had become my emergency pantry, my local bomb shelter, a sanctuary providing salvation for a city that was entering a post-apocalyptic world.
Karen Multer traveled here today from her home in Chicago, making her today's winner of the longest commute award. So she needs a hand for that by herself. Chicago. Karen has called Chicago her home for many years, yet she has never been able to shake her Wisconsin roots, growing up on the backwaters of the Mississippi River. As a writer, singer, and composer, Karen has written everything from chewing gum jingles and musical theater to short stories and essays. She's a former Dramatists Guild Fellow whose work has been featured at the Kennedy Center Page to Stage Festival. Her original music can be heard on projects for HBO, Netflix, and Amazon Originals, and she's published in Cutleaf Journal and the Black Fork Review. Among all of her accomplishments, she is proudest of her role as mother to two incredible daughters. Unlike those two incredible daughters, however, Karen was raised at a time when young women in our culture were inclined to tolerate things they very likely shouldn't have. As you will hear in her story, I was a courtesy girl. Please give a warm welcome back to Karen Multer.
Eddie, the blind guy, was pressing his fingertips into my left breast as I steered him down aisle 4, canned soups and pastas. With one hand pushing the shopping cart in front of us and my other arm extended away from my body so Eddie could grasp my upper arm, I was rendered temporarily defenseless. Each time I attempted to move my arm further away from my side, Eddie would push right back up against me, rhythmically pressing and kneading with his hand and fingers. I was confused. Was this involuntary, some function of his blindness? Maybe he's accustomed to reading Braille, I thought, and was perhaps searching for some deeper meaning in the ridges of my underwire bra. Or was this deliberate? It was hard to tell. Eddie may have been blind, but how blind was he really? He used a walking stick, but he wore glasses. Not dark glasses. Glasses. Whatever the reason for his wayward hands, something had to give. At 16, I'd landed my first job, courtesy girl, at the local grocery store. Each week, I was tasked with guiding Eddie through the store, describing the contents of each shelf we passed, and selecting whatever items he wanted. Now, the role of courtesy girl, it was a coveted position in those days. The first step toward the holy grail position of checkout girl. And make no mistake, we were all girls. presumably because our beguiling ways and smaller hands were more suited to the gentility of fine grocery work. Now, there were rules, you see. This role was awarded only to those with the requisite geniality, and this was important: compliance. There were rules about proper footwear, hairstyle, acceptable lipstick shades, and demeanor, of course. I was advised that my encyclopedic knowledge, liquid smoke, you ask, aisle 6, condiments, top shelf, 3/4 of the way down on your left, all of this was to be dispensed courteously, naturally, always with a pageant smile, so as to reflect the wholesomeness of the brand. Eddie, on the other hand, wasn't bound by the same rules of engagement. Eddie was a man who liked to keep me on my toes. So, while I was bent over the meat cooler, looking for the 2-pound package of chicken thighs, Eddie was looking to cop a cheap feel off an obedient girl trying gamely to live up to her title. But because I couldn't be absolutely sure of his intentions, I never told my supervisor what was happening. I complied. I didn't want to complain and appear ungrateful for the opportunity to wipe chicken juice off the floor. Instead, I learned to diffuse and dissuade. I became very adept at diversionary tactics. "Why don't you wait here while I go get those little candies you like?" I'd say to Eddie, smiling. I used this same tactic again and again with men old enough to be my grandfather. If grocery store hurdles were an Olympic sport, I'd have been at the top of the podium. I played the game, and I played it well, because this courtesy girl had bigger ambitions: prestige, money, power, that holy grail position just 15 steps over there. Well, I finally found my own voice. I lobbied hard for that promotion, and I got away from the probing hands of Eddie. I still saw him occasionally, but it was from the protection of the checkout lane. I was a courtesy girl, accommodating and polite. It was the 80s, after all, back when we still gave people the benefit of the doubt and we weren't so quick to take offense. But in reality, we were learning to tolerate all sorts of indignities, and as young girls, gritting our teeth and smiling all the while.
Another native of Chicagoland, David Masello moved to New York City from Evanston, Illinois, and he's made his living as a writer and editor here for more than 35 years. He continually explores and discovers new things in the cityscape, some of which turn into the minute-long self-narrated videos he posts on Instagram. David's career began as a nonfiction book editor at Simon & Schuster. He then held senior editorial positions at many magazines, including Travel and Leisure, Art and Antiques, and Town and Country. And I like to say, those are all, I think I'm fixated on the idea that they all have ampersands. Travel. He's currently executive editor of Milieu, which is a magazine about design and architecture. He's a widely published essayist, poet, and playwright, and his work has appeared in the New York Times, Best American Essays, numerous literary and art magazines, and small theater companies. The piece David contributes to this event today describes an alternative to the modern supermarket, to shopping for groceries in small individual shops along Italy's Amalfi Coast with a new friend. Returning to our stage to read Gathering the Meal, please say hello to writer David Masello.
My colleague, younger by a decade and a half, and the only other male on the writer's retreat to the Amalfi Coast, insisted on climbing the 261 steps with me to my one-room hilltop casa for lunch. He remained unfazed by my warning that after our meal of bread, cheese, fruits, gathered at the piazza markets, I would observe siesta on a single bed. He agreed to shop together for the food that we would share, visiting the specialty stores, all within peeling distance of the town's church. We appeared as a couple, an unfamiliar sight in an Italian town, two men buying groceries together midday. So, as we gathered our fare, from the salumeria for mortadella, fruttivendolo for plums, panetteria for focaccia, reading each other's faces when tasting a cheese, I don't know how we were perceived. Maybe just American tourists assembling a meal. In an Italian town, gathering food for lunch is not just a daily, quotidian endeavor, but also a life-affirming, sociable event. Chats with vendors, assessments of the ripeness of a fruit, choosing still water over a sparkling. Sacks of groceries hanging from our wrists, packages wrapped by the merchants like gifts, we made the climb, saying salvo to passing kids cradling soccer balls, hearing the Italian dialect coming from within houses, lights dimmed against the noonday heat. After we finished our meal on the terrace, we moved into the cool interior, the clink of plates in the sink, and then laid together on the narrow bed, shutters drawn against the Italian sun. We talked to the ceiling, strands of our hair mingling on the pillow. When he stopped talking, amid the whir of the ceiling fan, I remained awake, practicing already the anecdote I'd tell of being the only one on the trip to have literally slept with him. The straight man in the group, when all our fellow middle-aged women wanted him, away for a week from husbands, wearing strapless outfits to dinner to show off their tanned shoulders. They'd begun the trip by flirting with me too, but ceased when they learned of my unavailability, my orientation, which gave them permission to interlock arms with me as we strolled the cobblestoned streets, letting locals mistake us for a couple. People want to be perceived as being in love. Long past midnight, my phone lit in the darkness with a text from him. In his casa at the bottom of the hill on the town's main street, by day abuzz with Vespas. He was in distress about a young woman he was seeing back in New York, she threatening to leave. He needed company. I suggested he come up to talk. The climb should take me 10 minutes, he said. I pictured him on the ascent, making turns on the landing, his presence stirring wind chimes, maneuvering around bikes parked outside apartments, shushing barks from a dog confused by someone passing so late. I opened the shutters, the terrace door, lit candles in hurricanes, unwrapped our leftovers. When he arrived, I escorted him to the outdoor table. The town's Baroque church remained floodlit, and distant lights shone across the Mediterranean Bay. But the town was otherwise asleep, apart from us. We spoke quietly as we pulled apart the still fresh bread, reaching over each other to finger olives, rolling slices of meat between fingers and pouring more red. We talked, ate, sipped long enough for more of the lights across the bay to extinguish, for the full moon to have moved many degrees, from appearing pierced by the church steeple to rubbing up against the nave. It's a maxim we've all heard, that we don't change how we stay the same. Not true when you travel. Seems you're more willing to try a different life than at home. Replicate the routine of locals, assume another identity, as if wearing a costume you later take off. Our appetites satisfied, from the food and wine anyway, we yawned, recognizing it was time to go inside, relatch the shutters, and try for sleep. Thank you.
Tamara Belinfanti was raised in Jamaica, and she currently lives in Brooklyn, New York with her family and a tree named Henry. She's a law professor and a writer whose writing explores themes of identity, belonging, and transition, and she recently spent an inordinate amount of time researching how to rehome pigeons without much success. And I want to know more about that, actually. Tamara enjoys designing elaborate scavenger hunts, catering to cats, and cooking without a recipe, and her writing has appeared in stuffy legal journals, serious business publications, and other respectable outlets. And if Tamara weren't in Toronto today for a family emergency, she would step onto the stage and read it for you. But instead, her daughter Eleanor, who is a high school senior at St. Anne's School in Brooklyn, and, do we hear? St. Anne's, there you go. You have some fans. And she's a member of Model UN and costume crew besides, okay? She's going to close the show today reading her mom's piece. The piece is called Fantastico. Please give a very warm welcome to Eleanor Belinfanti.
One morning, 5 years ago, I went to my corner supermarket to get grits for breakfast. They were supposed to open at 7 a.m., but it was now 7:04, and the shutters were still down. I needed to feed my kids and get them off to school within the next 45 minutes. I glanced at my phone. The woman next to me cursed. Finally, the manager came running from the nearby bus stop. He apologized, unlocked the metal shutters, and let us in. "Good morning," he said cheerily. We grumbled a return greeting, and I marched determinedly towards the aisle with the grits. When I got to their usual shelf, I was instead met by a display of Korean noodles. I kissed my teeth, annoyed. I hustled over to the next aisle, aware that if I didn't find the grits soon, my whole morning would unravel. Where is that manager? I wondered, as I rushed past the spice racks, cheese displays, tacos, ice cream, and beer. Still no grits. It was then that the manager appeared. "Good morning," he said again, in the same upbeat voice. "How are you doing this morning?" "Hi, how are you?" I replied, perhaps a little too brusquely. "I'm having trouble finding the Bob's Red Mill grits. You guys moved them." My tone was accusatory. "Ah, yes," said the manager. "Follow me." He walked me over a few aisles. "We put all the Bob's Red Mill together," he said, handing me his grits, clearly pleased with this decision. I said thank you and headed to the registers when he said, "But you never answered my question." "What question?" I asked, confused. "Ah," he said, "you never told me how you're doing. So I ask you again, how are you doing this morning?" I wanted to tell him that I had no time for banter. Instead, I simply said, "I'm fine." "No," he said, still smiling. "I ask you again, how are you?" Now, I was just as irritated at this manager as I was at the Korean noodles. "I'm fine, but I really need to go." He shook his head and leaned in a little. "You're not fine. You are Fantastico." "Here, I check you out," he said, putting down his price tag machine on top of a cardboard box. I paid for my grits, and as he handed me my receipt, he said, "You have a good day, and remember, you are here this morning, and so you are Fantastico." His response caught me off guard. I paused, but was too caught up with my immediate problem of hurrying back home. But our game began that day. Each time I went into that supermarket, we repeated our lines. Sometimes I forgot mine and said, "I'm fine," and then we'd have to repeat the whole sequence until I remembered the right answer, Fantastico. Over the years, I've learned a bit about him. He's from Ecuador. He likes his job. He has a family. He's listened patiently to my woes about losing my wallet, breaking my toe, and getting walking pneumonia, and has acknowledged these mishaps with, "Ah, yes, But you're Fantastico, no? The game took on a whole new meaning during the pandemic. Behind masks and 6 feet apart, we were both here, and so we would say, I am Fantastico. Earlier this year, I moved. Now there's another supermarket around the corner, and this new store is bright and well lit, and the grits are in a logical place. Sometimes, though, I make a point to stop in at my old supermarket, just so I can remind myself that I am here, so I am indeed Fantastico.
So now, Eleanor, now that you've gone all the way, come on back. I want all the writers to come join me on stage. Come on back. So, as most, and but you see, I have been fiddling with this microphone all afternoon, but we have returned to our roots. This is the Shure 5500 microphone. This is like the Elvis microphone, the Ella Fitzgerald microphone, the like classic, was part of our branding. And it is true that it looks better than it sounds, so it requires a little finicky, but we're glad to have it back this time after a long time away. As most of you know, Writers Read was built around afternoons like this one, and it is humbling and electrifying to spend time, this kind of curated time, with such a fine group of writers. And I am so proud of what a small group of committed unpaid volunteers has accomplished and continues to build with me. Thank you again to City Winery for all the support and their efforts here today. Again, there's so many moving parts to this organization, many of which are here in the room today. We do need help steering it. We have a pro editorial team, a great marketing committee. We do have those open seats on finance and production. But please do tell your friends about us. Please consider a charitable gift, etc. And do take your program to share with one person in your life who you think might want to know what we're doing. If you don't have to be somewhere else right now, please do join us in the gallery. We have a little reception planned. You can meet the writers. We can talk to each other. And we're going to do that in a moment. But right after we do this, hold on. Come on up here.